Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to...
Could Hungary actually be kicked out of the EU?
Over the past decade or so, Viktor Orbán's Hungary has developed a bit
you
of a
know about this or
reputation
not?
as the troublemaker or bad
I mean, we've seen in these reactions that Hungary is kind of, they're not really on par with the decisions that the EU is making. They're more leaning towards like the Russia side, I think. So
Is it they will get kicked out or they want to leave?
kicked out seems like the type.
Oh,
boy of the European Union. Most other member states disagree with both Orbán's illiberal domestic politics and his relatively pro-Russia foreign policy. But the EU has been unable to convince Orbán to change course, and his veto power has given him significant sway over the EU's foreign policy orientation. This has become a particularly difficult issue since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which only looks likely to become more acute as the EU moves towards an independent security architecture. However, over the past few days, we've seen a handful of reports that, if Hungary does try to veto efforts to develop an EU security architecture, senior EU officials are looking at
Is
how
that
they might
their
actually
flag?
be able to
Which flag?
this
Yeah,
one?
yeah, that's Hungary.
It looks like so many other flags.
Like Italy sideways.
Yeah.
kick Hungary out of the bloc. So, in this video, we're going to take a look at how
elongated.
Hungary's relations with the EU have deteriorated over time, why the EU will probably need to develop a more muscular security policy, and what might happen if Orbán gets in the way. Just a politician right now, YouTube channel, or
I think Romania,
Romania.
maybe Moldova. I'm not sure. They're in the Balkans.
in your
Oh, in the
favourite
Balkans,
podcast
okay.
app. So let's start with a quick overview of EU-Hungary relations. Because, well, this isn't the first time the Commission and Orbán haven't seen eye to eye. Ever since Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán came to power in 2010, the EU has been worried about what's commonly known as democratic backsliding,
That's a
and
long
has
time.
frequently accused Orbán of undermining the independence of the judiciary and the media. Tensions came to a head in 2018 when the European Parliament voted to trigger Article 7 of the EU Treaty, which allows the EU to suspend certain rights from a member state. When this didn't go anywhere, in 2020, the EU created a new rule of law conditionality mechanism, which basically allowed the EU to withhold funds from countries that had violated the rule of law, like Hungary. Since then, the EU and Hungary have been stuck at a standstill. The EU is withholding billions of euros in EU funding to Hungary, but Orbán has refused to reverse his more controversial reforms.
They don't
Tensions
need
have
the
also
money.
Yeah, they're good.
19 billion,
Yeah,
they don't need
they
it.
don't need it. They're good.
been exacerbated by Orbán's relatively pro-Russia position in the Ukraine war. Orbán has refused to send aid to Ukraine, resisted sanctions on Russia, and maintained a relatively cosy relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, even visiting him in Moscow last year. Anyway, when tensions flare between Orbán and the EU, more liberal-minded Europeans often call for Hungary to be expelled
I
from the
wonder
bloc.
historically what has been their relationship.
With Russia?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I don't know too much about Hungarian history.
In the past, we've been pretty dismissive of this idea for the simple reason that there's no legal mechanism to kick a member state out of the bloc. And as much as Orbán complains about the EU, he's not going to voluntarily leave anytime soon. After all, the EU serves as a convenient bogeyman, and Orbán's veto gives him way more sway over European policy than he would have otherwise. However, this time might be different. European leaders almost all agree that the continent desperately needs a new independent security architecture.
But it can be tricky because then other countries can be like, oh, if they're not holding their part, why should I hold up my part?
Mm-hmm.
Cope with both Trump's abandoning of Ukraine and the threat of renewed Russian aggression down the line. While there has been some suggestion that the immediate response for Ukraine could be done outside the EU, the UK, for instance, likes talking about a coalition of the willing that could apparently include Turkey, Canada, or even Australia, a more permanent security architecture to guarantee European security for the long term will probably have to be organised via the EU. This is for essentially two reasons. First, there simply isn't time to set up some new organisation, and it would be far more efficient to use the EU's pre-existing structures. And second, no other new organisation has the EU's fiscal firepower. What we mean by this is that rearming Europe is clearly going to cost a lot of money, but national budgets are already strained. The EU, however, can take some of the strain by stepping in as a borrower of last resort, and can borrow at lower rates than most European countries, thanks to its outstanding credit rating. We saw this earlier this month, when Ursula von der Leyen announced that the EU could borrow 150 billion euros at the EU level to help fund Europe's rearmament, and we should probably expect further joint borrowing in the near future, especially if Trump's trade
To
wars
me,
put
it would make sense because if everyone in the union have the initiative to do something about this. So instead of creating like a whole different organization to tackle just this one task, have that under the umbrella of the European Union.
I think there's, like some countries they're not like as interested in and the defense, like
Oh.
countries that are not too, or like that are not realistically going to be affected by Russia. Like, so, for example, I'm not saying that these are the countries, but as example, Italy, Spain, Portugal, for them it's like Russia has to conquer the whole Europe to reach them. So
Mm-hmm.
for them it's not like that
Mm-hmm.
relevant. So I think those
Mm-hmm.
might be opposed, but like especially like Eastern countries that have like a border of like a country away from the border of
Mm-hmm.
Russia, for those countries I think that is very relevant.
Further strain on the European economy. Anyway, you get the point. Most of Europe agrees that the continent needs its own independent security architecture, and this will probably have to be done at the EU level. However, because foreign policy decisions require unanimity among member states, Hungary has a veto here. Orban has proved willing to exercise this veto in the past. Only last week, Hungary vetoed a joint declaration expressing
I
EU
think it's
support for
even
Ukraine.
in Russia's position to have Hungary stay in the EU to utilize its veto power.
Well, yeah, but if EU changes the bylaws that they could kick a country out, then what they gonna do?
Ukraine, and EU officials have told Euractiv they expect him to veto the renewal of European sanctions on Russia.
How to find the perfect pet sitter in 4 easy
Interesting
steps.
though, why did he
Step 1.
approve
Go to
the
rover.com or
sanctions to
download the
begin
Rover
with
app.
then? Because
Which
he didn't veto because apparently the sanctions are in place, so he didn't veto it. I wonder.
expire on March the 15th. This isn't the end of the world, but if Orban continues to wield his veto so freely, or uses it to stymie moves towards an EU security architecture that the other leaders deem necessary for the continent's protection, senior EU officials are apparently talking about ways to somehow force Hungary out, at least according to reports by Mujtaba Rahman at the Eurasia Group. Now, at this point, you might be thinking,
I wonder
wait a second.
if this is also agreed upon by the people of Hungary too, or just on a government level.
I'm not sure.
I don't know how.
I think
their
there was like
relations.
a election scandal or something when
Mhm.
we did like the elections.
Yeah.
I think there was something that he didn't really get elected. I don't remember exactly.
Oh.
But
It doesn't like he seems like he's been in this position for a long time. I
yeah.
don't know. At this point, it's like he's doing what
I
he
think
wants
it's
now.
kind of like 50-50, honestly.
Second, I thought you just said there was no legal mechanism to kick out a member
Which I guess, to be fair, most of the countries are 50-50. So
state. And well, you're right, we did just say that, and there isn't. However, during times of crisis, the EU has a habit of finding a way, and doing things that aren't obviously licensed by its treaties. During the Eurozone crisis, for instance, the ECB found a way to buy up government debt, despite the fact that Article 123 of the Maastricht Treaty forbids European central banks from directly funding government debt. During the pandemic, again, the European Commission played a big role in negotiating and procuring vaccines, despite the fact that, under current European law, the Commission has no direct competency over health policy, which is supposed to be up to member states. Now, to be clear, we're not saying this is necessarily going to happen, or even that it's likely. One big caveat worth mentioning is that Hungary's economy is really struggling, which means Orban might relent if that means he gets his hands on the billions of euros the EU is currently withholding. Orban is also currently behind Peter Magyar's teaser party in the polls, which means the EU might decide to just wait until the next election and hope Orban's replacement is more amenable. Nonetheless, if the EU does move towards developing its own load-bearing security architecture, a showdown between Hungary and the rest of the bloc looks somewhat inevitable, and history suggests that when the EU is faced with crisis, politics trumps law. Like a lot of things, this whole situation is very much in a state of flux. With Trump breaking international alliances and fundamentally changing geopolitics, the world has certainly felt more stable. Every day, we're faced with weird headlines from Trump's trade.
Alright, that's it.
Can I see the comments? I'm about to see
Sure.
what the people think. What do you think? They're gonna get kicked out or what?
I don't know if they're gonna get kicked out, but this whole veto that one country cannot stop the whole EU, that's
Yeah.
I don't.
Mm.
In theory is nice, but in practice, when like a war is about to break down, I don't know if that like change it to like 2/3. That's what 66%. You don't want that. Make it 3/4, 75%. Shit, you don't want that. At least make it 90%. You know that.
Yeah, I
But
think so too.
but like one country cannot hold
Yeah.
every other country like at the stalemate. That's just
Yeah,
too
Yeah,
extra.
and I wonder if the concern will turn into okay, if you kick out Hungary, they're gonna go with directly to Russia.
I think that's what's the kind of like they don't want the whole, because yeah, if you know why they wouldn't wanna, that argument could be made that they're afraid that they would become a Russian ally. So
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think
why not at
I
that point?
yeah, I think the solution wouldn't be kicking out, but I think would be more common sense is to just change the bylaws that no, it's not veto, but it's like
A certain percentage.
yeah, like I don't know exactly how many countries 27. Okay, so there's 27 countries. Make it so that 24 countries needs it. So like if 3 countries, disagree, whatever, who cares? I think something like that. What do you think?
Oh no, I agree. No, I agree with you.
Yeah. The veto power needs to be abandoned. Yeah. My country, Poland, practiced the veto in the 17th and 18th centuries. It ended with the fall of the state and disappearance from the map of Europe for 123 years.
The thing is, what's weird is the veto power is not to be held by someone like at that level. I think the veto power should be whoever is at the top has the ultimate veto power. Not everyone who's
who's at the top though? What is?
I don't know. That's the thing.
The whole point of this EU is that there's no top.
Exactly. Equal. But if everyone is equal, you cannot have one have the power to null. That's not equal.
True. That is true. Yeah.
Okay, guys. Of course, let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord, and as always, share as much kindness as possible.